The howl pierced the sterile quiet of Memorial Hospital's East Wing, stopping doctors and patients mid-stride. It wasn't just any howl. It was the precise, mournful cry that came exactly at 3:47 p.m., as reliable as the hospital's medication rounds. Outside room 347, a German shepherd with a scar over his left eye sat at perfect attention, his military tags glinting under the fluorescent lights. His coat was impeccably clean despite having no owner in sight. Some patients wiped away tears. The nurses continued their duties, having witnessed this ritual for months. On the security monitor at the nurses' station, head nurse Sarah Thompson watched the dog's unwavering vigil. The shepherd's eyes never left the door, as though expecting someone to emerge at any moment. Hospital Administrator Michael Davis glared at the monitor, his patience visibly thinning. "This ends now," he muttered, tapping his clipboard against the counter. "I don't care what the staff thinks. That animal is a liability." What no one knew was why this battle-scarred shepherd refused to leave, or what secrets lay hidden beneath his collar. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Memorial Hospital stood as a weathered sentinel on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, Virginia, a town where American flags flew from nearly every porch. Once a thriving manufacturing hub, Oak Ridge now survived largely on its veteran population and the hospital that served them. The East Wing, dedicated to those who had served, was always full, a testament to wars fought and sacrifices made. The hospital's corridors were long and polished, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Room 347 sat at the end of the trauma unit hallway, now empty but somehow still holding memories within its walls. The nurses spoke in hushed tones whenever they passed it, as if ghosts might be listening. Max wasn't just any German shepherd. His military bearing remained evident in every movement, from his perfectly straight sitting posture to his alert ears that missed nothing. The scar over his left eye pulled slightly, giving him a perpetually questioning look. His fur, though clean, showed the subtle patterns of a dog who had seen combat small patches missing, a healed nick in one ear. When he walked, it was with purpose and dignity, never straying, never begging. Sergeant James "Jimmy" Miller had been a hometown hero, an Army Ranger with 3 tours before the IED that damaged his spine. Photographs in the local diner showed a square-jawed man with kind eyes and the same resolute expression his dog now carried. His death 6 months ago had left a hole in the community that no one quite knew how to fill. Emily Miller, at just 9 years old, had already known more loss than most adults. After losing her mother to cancer when she was 3, her father had become her everything. Now, living with her grandmother in a small house across town, she walked through the world with solemn eyes that seemed to search for something just beyond reach. Sarah Thompson had been head nurse in the trauma unit for 15 years. At 45, the widow of a Marine carried herself with quiet strength, her salt and pepper hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore sensible shoes and kept extra granola bars in her pockets for patients or staff in need of kindness. Michael Davis ruled the hospital with an iron clipboard, a man who believed that rules existed for a reason. At 58, the hospital administrator's wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually furrowed brow had become as much a fixture of memorial as the bronze plaque in the entryway. Sarah Thompson first noticed the German shepherd on a Tuesday morning in December. The winter chill had crept through the hospital's sliding doors, and she was hurrying toward the coffee machine when she spotted him sitting perfectly still outside room 347, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. She had assumed he belonged to a patient and continued on her rounds. By Wednesday, she realized no one was claiming him. By Thursday, she was leaving a small bowl of water near the fire exit. By Friday, several nurses were taking turns bringing kibble in plastic containers. "He arrives at exactly 8 a.m., Nurse Jenny Winters told Sarah during shift change. "Like he's punching a time card. Sits there all day. Then leaves when visiting hours end. Never makes a mess. Never bothers anybody." Sarah watched the shepherd from the nurse's station. His military tags clinked softly when he shifted position. But mostly he remained still, a statue of fur and discipline. Patients would stop to pet him as they walked the halls for exercise. He would allow it. But his eyes never left the door of room 347. "That's Jimmy Miller's old room," Sarah realized aloud one morning, the connection suddenly becoming clear. Sergeant Miller had been a patient for nearly 2 months before his passing a man with a spine damaged by an IED and a spirit that refused to be broken. Sarah had been there the day he died, had recorded the time of death, 3:47 p.m. On the 7th day of the dog's vigil, Sarah knelt beside him, noticing how he acknowledged her with the barest tilt of his head while maintaining his watch. "You're his, aren't you?" she whispered, gently reaching for the tags that hung from his collar. The metal was warm from his body heat. "Max," she read aloud, then turned over the military dog tag that hung beside the standard identification. "Service dog, 54th Battalion." Max's ears perked slightly at the sound of his name, but his eyes remained fixed on the door. It was precisely 3:47 p.m. when Sarah heard it for the first time, a single, soulful howl that echoed down the corridor. Patients emerged from their rooms. Nurses stopped pushing medication carts. For 30 seconds, Max stood at attention, his muzzle pointed skyward, releasing a sound so full of longing it made Sarah's eyes sting with tears. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his sitting position, resuming his silent vigil. The next morning, Sarah arrived to find Michael Davis standing over Max, clipboard in hand, a security guard hovering uncertainly behind him. "This ends today," Davis announced when he spotted Sarah. "We've allowed this for a week. It's against every regulation in the book." "He's not hurting anyone," Sarah countered, moving protectively toward Max, who hadn't budged. Davis pushed his glasses higher on his nose. "He's an animal in a medical facility. Do you have any idea of the liability issues, the health code violations, the potential allergic reactions?" "He's cleaner than most of the visitors," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "And he was Sergeant Miller's service dog." Davis's expression flickered. Jimmy Miller had been well loved in Oak Ridge, but he steeled himself. "I don't care if he belonged to the president. Hospital policy is clear. No animals except registered service animals accompanying current patients. He is a service animal, with no patient to service." Davis countered. "I'm giving you 1 week. Either find somewhere else for this dog to go, or I'm calling animal control. That's me being generous. Thompson." The security guard looked relieved when Davis stormed off. He gave Sarah an apologetic shrug before following his boss. Sarah knelt beside Max again, her hand gently resting on his fur. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered. The following days established a pattern. Max would arrive as the morning shift began, taking his position outside room 347. The nurses would check on him throughout the day, offering water and the occasional treat. At exactly 3:47 p.m., he would stand and release a single howl that stopped all activity in the East Wing. Then he would resume his watch until visiting hours ended, when he would trot to the sliding doors and disappear into the night. Sarah began researching military service dogs during her breaks. She learned about their training, their bonds with handlers, their ability to detect changes in human physiology. She discovered that when separated from their handlers, some dogs showed signs of depression and anxiety that mirrored human grief. "He's mourning," Dr. Robert Anderson confirmed when Sarah brought Max to his veterinary clinic after her shift. The 62-year-old vet checked Max's eyes, ears, and teeth with gentle expertise. "I served as a military doctor before becoming a vet. Saw plenty of these partnerships. The bond between a handler and a military dog goes beyond anything you might see with a typical pet." "Is he healthy?" Sarah asked, watching as Max tolerated the examination with stoic patience. "Physically, yes, though he could use a few more good meals." Dr. Anderson ran his hand along Max's side. "But he's grieving. Animals process loss differently than we do, but they do process it. Some dogs have been known to return to significant locations, searching for their deceased owners." "The hospital room." "Exactly. It was probably the last place he saw Sergeant Miller alive." "What happens when Davis forces him to leave?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Anderson's face softened with concern. "Best case, he finds another focus for his devotion. Worst case, some dogs stop eating. They give up." That evening, Sarah reviewed Jimmy Miller's medical file. His final admission had been for complications related to his spinal injury, increased pain, difficulty breathing, sudden cardiac symptoms. Nothing that should have been fatal for a man in his 30s. Yet something about his case had always bothered her. The sudden decline, the elevated heart rate that didn't respond to medication, the strange readings on his final blood work. The next morning, Sarah arrived early, determined to check the security footage from the day Max first appeared. She found him already at his post, somehow having slipped past the night security. "You're early today," she said, setting down her bag to give him a gentle scratch behind the ears. Max's tail thumped once against the floor, the most enthusiasm she'd seen from him, and then Sarah noticed something different about his collar, a small bulge beneath the fabric. Carefully, she slipped her fingers under the collar, feeling for the source of the bulge. What she found made her breath catch a small key, the kind used for hospital medication cabinets, tucked into a hidden pocket sewn into the collar's lining. "What did Jimmy give you?" she whispered, before she could investigate further. A small voice echoed down the hallway. "Max." Sarah turned to see a little girl with honey-blonde hair and solemn blue eyes staring in disbelief at the German Shepherd. Max's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His tail began to wag, his ears perked forward, and a soft whine escaped his throat. "Max!" the girl cried again, breaking into a run. And for the first time since he'd begun his vigil, Max broke position, rushing forward to meet Emily Miller halfway down the corridor. Emily Miller fell to her knees as Max reached her, burying her face in his fur while his tail swept back and forth across the polished floor. The girl's thin shoulders shook with silent sobs as she clung to him. Max whined softly, nudging her with his nose, his entire body quivering with restrained joy. "I thought I lost you too," Emily whispered, her voice muffled against his neck. Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on their reunion. The sight before her explained so much: the dog's devotion, his daily visits, the howl at 3:47. He hadn't just lost his handler, he'd lost his family. "Emily," Sarah said gently, "I'm Nurse Thompson. I've been looking after Max while he's been visiting us." The girl looked up, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks. "He's been here every day, every single day," Sarah confirmed, kneeling to be at eye level with her. "Right outside your dad's old room." Fresh tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Grandma said he ran away after the funeral. I've been looking everywhere." She buried her fingers in Max's ruff, as if afraid he might disappear again. "Daddy always said Max was the most loyal friend he ever had." "How did you know to find him here?" Emily looked down. "I didn't tell Grandma I was coming. She doesn't like to talk about Daddy or the hospital. Says it's too sad. But I had a dream that Max was waiting somewhere important, and I remembered how he used to wait outside when Daddy had appointments." Sarah glanced at her watch. Her shift had officially started 5 minutes ago, but this seemed more important than morning rounds. "Would you like some hot chocolate? We could talk in the break room." 30 minutes later, seated in the staff lounge with a mug of cocoa warming her hands, Emily shared the story of her father and Max, how they'd met in Afghanistan when Jimmy was assigned to a special unit working with military dogs, how Max had saved Jimmy's patrol from an ambush, taking shrapnel in his face that left the scar above his eye, how Jimmy had fought to adopt Max when the dog was deemed too traumatized for continued service. "They helped each other get better," Emily explained, stroking Max's head as he lay pressed against her chair. "Daddy said they understood each other's nightmares." Sarah thought about the key hidden in Max's collar. "Emily, did your father ever mention any concerns about the hospital, or maybe about his medication?" The girl's brow furrowed. "He told me once that something didn't add up. That's what he said. Something doesn't add up. Bear. But then he got really sick that last week." Before Sarah could ask more questions, Michael Davis appeared in the doorway, his face darkening at the sight of Max inside the staff lounge. "Thompson, a word." It wasn't a request. Sarah followed him into the hallway, closing the door behind her to shield Emily from what would surely be an unpleasant conversation. "That animal is now inside our break room with food preparation areas." Davis's voice was tight with controlled anger. "His name is Max, and I just discovered he belongs to Emily Miller, Sergeant Miller's daughter. The girl's been looking for him since her father died." Davis's expression shifted slightly. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change hospital policy. In fact, it makes the solution simple. The dog goes home with the girl." "It's not that simple. She lives with her grandmother, who apparently doesn't want the dog." "Not my problem," Davis said flatly. "My job is to ensure this facility meets health and safety standards. The deadline stands 1 week from yesterday. That dog is gone one way or another." As Davis walked away, Sarah leaned against the wall, wondering how she'd become so invested in Max's fate in just a few days. Something about his unwavering loyalty struck a chord deep within her, a reminder of devotion in a world that often seemed to have forgotten the meaning of the word. When she returned to the break room, she found Emily looking pale, one hand pressed against her stomach. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" Emily nodded unconvincingly. "Just tired. I didn't sleep good last night." Sarah's nursing instincts kicked in. She pressed the back of her hand to Emily's forehead. "You're running a fever. How long have you been feeling sick?" "Since yesterday, but I had to find Max." "Let me call your grandmother." "No." Emily's reaction was immediate and fearful. "She'll be mad. I came here alone. She doesn't like to be reminded about Daddy." Sarah considered her options. "All right, but I need to check you over properly. Will you let me do that?" "In the pediatric exam room." Sarah's concern deepened. Emily's temperature was 101.3, her pulse rapid, and she admitted to experiencing stomach pain and dizziness for the past 2 days. Max had refused to leave her side, somehow sensing her distress. "I think we need to admit you for observation," Sarah finally said. "Those symptoms could indicate several things we need to monitor." "Can Max stay with me?" Sarah thought of Davis and his regulations. "We'll figure something out." By that afternoon, Emily had been admitted to the pediatric ward with a preliminary diagnosis of appendicitis. Sarah had arranged for Dr. Anderson to classify Max as a therapy dog, temporarily a considerable bending of rules that would buy them time, but wouldn't satisfy Davis for long. During her lunch break, Sarah visited the hospital's security office. Frank Wilson, the head of security, was an ally his son had served with Jimmy in Afghanistan. "I need to check some footage from 6 months ago," she explained. "The day Sergeant Miller passed." Frank's weathered face softened with sympathy. "This about his dog. The whole security team's been watching him on the monitors. Breaks your heart." He led her to a small room filled with screens and hard drives. "We keep digital records for a year before archiving. What time frame do you need?" His time of death was recorded at 3:47 p.m. on May 12th. Frank typed commands into the system, and the screen filled with footage of room 347. Sarah watched as medical staff rushed in and out, as monitors flatlined, as emergency procedures were performed. And there, barely visible in the corner of the frame, was Max somehow in the room during Jimmy's final moments. "How did he get in there?" Sarah wondered aloud. "Service dogs aren't allowed during emergency procedures." Frank shrugged. "Chaos of the moment, probably. No one notices a dog when a patient is crashing." Sarah leaned closer to the screen. "Can you go back about 20 minutes before the code was called?" The footage rewound, showing Jimmy in bed, appearing stable if uncomfortable. Then Sarah noticed something odd, a nurse she didn't recognize entering the room, checking the IV bags, and making an adjustment to Jimmy's medication. 10 minutes later, his vitals began to drop. "Who is that?" she asked, pointing to the unfamiliar nurse. Frank zoomed in on the grainy image. "Don't recognize her. Could be agency staff or a floater from another unit. Can you track her movements before and after this?" As Frank pulled up additional camera angles, a disturbing pattern emerged. The unknown nurse had visited several patients that day, all veterans, all receiving pain management. 2 of those patients had experienced complications requiring emergency intervention. 1 had died, Jimmy Miller. "Something's not right," Sarah murmured, a chill running down her spine. "I need to check the medication records for that day." As she was leaving the security office, her pager beeped with an urgent message from pediatrics. Emily's condition had worsened dramatically. What had appeared to be appendicitis was now presenting as something more serious: severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and rising fever. Sarah ran toward the pediatric wing, her mind racing. The key in Max's collar, Jimmy's cryptic comment that something doesn't add up, the mysterious nurse, and now Emily, suddenly critically ill. When she reached Emily's room, she found medical staff surrounding the bed while Max stood rigid at the foot, a low growl building in his throat as he stared at one of the IV bags hanging beside Emily's bed. "Get that dog out of here now," Dr. Phillips, the attending physician, barked as he checked Emily's vital signs. The 9-year-old girl lay pale and still against the white hospital sheets, her honey-blonde hair damp with sweat. Sarah moved toward Max, who refused to back away from the IV stand. His hackles were raised, teeth bared, not at the medical team but at the clear bag of fluid dripping into Emily's arm. She'd never seen him aggressive before. This was a trained military dog whose discipline had been impeccable for months. "Wait," Sarah said, raising her hand to the frustrated doctor. "Something's wrong with that medication." "We don't have time for this," Dr. Phillips snapped. "Her fever's spiking to 104, and she's showing signs of systemic inflammation. Security." Sarah made a split-second decision. Trusting instincts formed from 15 years of nursing and the unnerving connection between Jimmy Miller's mysterious death and his daughter's sudden illness, she stepped between Max and the approaching security officer. "Stop the IV immediately," she commanded with such authority that a young resident actually reached over and clamped the line. "This dog is trained to detect certain substances. If he's reacting to her medication, we need to listen." Dr. Phillips looked ready to explode, but the resident spoke up. "Actually, I've read studies about service dogs detecting chemical changes. Some can identify certain drugs or compounds by scent." "Check the patient history," Sarah insisted. "Has Emily been given anything containing sulfa drugs?" Max's reaction reminds me of how detection dogs alert to specific substances. The room fell into tense silence as the resident quickly reviewed Emily's chart on the computer. No sulfa drugs listed in her history or allergies. But wait, she was just given trimethoprim sulfa methoxazole for possible UTI complicating the appendicitis symptoms. That could cause an allergic reaction presenting as systemic inflammation if she's sensitive to it, Dr. Phillips admitted grudgingly. "Switch to a non-sulfa alternative and add diphenhydramine for the allergic response." He gave Sarah a hard look. "If you're wrong about this—" "I'm not," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. She knelt beside Max, who had relaxed slightly when the IV was clamped but still watched the bag with suspicious eyes. "Good boy," she whispered. "Good, brave boy." Within an hour, Emily's condition began to stabilize. The substituted antibiotics worked without triggering the severe reaction, and her fever gradually subsided. Sarah sat beside her bed, watching the girl's steady breathing, while Max lay vigilant at her feet. "You saved her," Dr. Phillips acknowledged quietly when he came to check Emily's vitals. That reaction was escalating toward anaphylaxis. "How did you know?" Sarah stroked Max's head. "I didn't. He did." After her shift ended, Sarah didn't go home. Instead, she made her way to the hospital pharmacy, the key from Max's collar heavy in her pocket. As head nurse, she had access to medication storage areas, but this particular key was different, smaller, with unusual teeth that didn't match the hospital's standard issue. The mystery deepened when she discovered it didn't fit any of the medication cabinets. Frustrated, she leaned against a wall, turning the key over in her fingers. What had Jimmy been trying to preserve? What was so important he'd hidden it on his loyal companion, Nurse Thompson? Sarah startled, quickly pocketing the key as she turned to face Michael Davis. "Working late?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Just checking on Emily Miller. The dog actually detected a severe medication allergy. He very likely saved her life." Something flickered across Davis's face, surprise, perhaps, or concern. "Fascinating, but still not a reason to violate hospital policy. Dogs do not belong in medical settings outside very specific parameters." "Even when they save lives?" Sarah challenged. Davis adjusted his glasses. "Rules exist for a reason. Thompson. Without them, we have chaos." He glanced at his watch. "I have a board meeting. We'll be discussing the dog situation, among other things. Don't get too attached to this crusade of yours." As he walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Davis's interest wasn't merely bureaucratic. There was something almost nervous in his demeanor. She returned to Emily's room to find the girl awake. Her color improved, with Max still maintaining his protective position. "He saved me," Emily said softly when Sarah checked her temperature. "Just like he saved my dad in Afghanistan. That's why they gave him a special medal." Sarah pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Your dad must have been very brave. The bravest." Emily nodded firmly. "He told me once that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." Her small fingers tangled in Max's fur. "He said Max was brave like that, too." "Emily," Sarah began carefully, "did your dad ever mention any concerns about his treatment here? Or maybe about certain people at the hospital?" The girl's brow furrowed in concentration. "He was worried about his medicine. Said it made him feel funny sometimes. Not like it was supposed to." She looked up at Sarah with eyes too serious for a 9-year-old. "The night before he died, he made me memorize something. He said if anything happened to him, I should tell a policeman or someone I trusted." Sarah's heart quickened. "What was it?" "A name. Elizabeth Chambers. And something about Locker 217. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But then he died. And Grandma wouldn't let me talk about him. And I didn't know who to tell." Sarah squeezed the girl's hand reassuringly. "You did the right thing telling me now. Your dad would be proud of you." After Emily drifted off to sleep, Sarah made her way to the hospital's basement, where employee lockers lined a dim hallway. Most belonged to surgical staff who needed to change before and after procedures, but some were assigned to administrative personnel. Locker 217 had a simple combination lock, with a sense of trespassing. Sarah tried the key from Max's collar on an off chance. To her surprise, it slid in perfectly. Inside, she found a small waterproof case containing a USB drive and a handwritten note in a strong masculine script. "If you're reading this, I was right. EC is diverting meds from 5 patients in East Wing. Watch room 347 camera on 510 between 2-4 p.m. Drive contains inventory discrepancies. Trust no one until you see footage. JM." Sarah's hands trembled as she pocketed the USB drive. Jimmy had been investigating something before his death, something serious enough that he'd hidden evidence on his dog. perhaps suspecting his own life was in danger. The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find Dr. Robert Anderson waiting in the hospital lobby, veterinary bag in hand. "Thought I'd check on our hero," he explained with a warm smile. "Word travels fast in a small town. That dog detecting a medication allergy is quite a story." Sarah led him to Emily's room, where the girl was eating breakfast with Max, attentively watching each spoonful of cereal. "How's our patient this morning?" "Doctor," Anderson asked, setting his bag down. "Much better." Emily beamed. "The doctor says I can go home tomorrow if nothing changes," while Dr. Anderson examined Max, giving him a clean bill of health and a few treats from his pocket. Sarah contemplated her next move. She needed to view the USB drive contents, but hospital computers were monitored. She would need help from someone she could trust. "Dr. Anderson," she said as they stepped into the hallway, "I need your help with something sensitive. It's about Sergeant Miller's death." The veterinarian's jovial expression sobered immediately. "Jimmy was a good man. What's going on?" Sarah explained her discoveries, the key, the locker, the note about diverted medications. "I believe Jimmy was investigating drug theft within the hospital before he died, and I'm starting to think his death wasn't from natural causes." Dr. Anderson's weathered face creased with concern. "That would explain Max's behavior. These dogs are trained to protect their handlers at all costs." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "I have a computer in my clinic that's not connected to any hospital network. Bring the USB there this afternoon." As Sarah turned to leave, she noticed a small group of men gathered near the hospital entrance. They wore Veterans Organization jackets and caps, talking in low, serious tones. Word's gotten out about Max, Dr. Anderson explained, following her gaze. "The local VFW chapter is organizing a kind of protest against removing him. Jimmy was well respected in the veteran community." By noon, the number of veterans had grown to nearly 30. They formed a respectful line along the hospital's front walkway, holding signs that read, "Let Max stay," and "Honor our heroes two and four-legged." The local news had arrived, interviewing older men with weathered faces who spoke passionately about service dogs and the bonds formed in combat. Michael Davis was livid. Sarah watched from the nurse's station as he argued with the hospital's public relations director. "This is becoming a circus," he hissed. "I want those people removed from hospital property immediately." "They're on public sidewalks," the PR director countered, "and frankly, Michael, this is a public relations nightmare. These are respected veterans defending a military dog that just saved a child's life. If we remove that dog now, we'll be crucified in the press." Davis's face flushed with anger. "The board meeting is at 4 p.m. This will be settled then." He stormed off toward his office, nearly colliding with a tall man in a police uniform. "Nurse Thompson." The officer approached the desk. "Detective Frank Morgan, Oak Ridge PD. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Sergeant James Miller." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Of course. Is there somewhere private we can talk?" "In a small consultation room." Detective Morgan explained his presence. "Dr. Anderson called me this morning. We served together in the Gulf War, and he trusts my discretion. He mentioned you found some concerning evidence regarding Sergeant Miller's death." Sarah hesitated only briefly before sharing everything she'd discovered. The detective's expression grew increasingly grave as she spoke. "I was actually the responding officer when Jimmy passed," he revealed. "Called in because a death of someone his age required routine investigation. Everything seemed in order medically, but Jimmy's father, who passed last year, was my former partner on the force. I owed it to him to be thorough." "Did you notice anything unusual?" Sarah asked. "Nothing that raised immediate flags. But I did think it strange that a man recovering from spinal issues would suddenly develop fatal cardiac complications." He pulled out a small notebook. "This Elizabeth Chambers, any idea who she is?" The name wasn't familiar, but I checked staff records this morning. She was a traveling nurse who worked here for 3 months, including the period when Jimmy died. Her contract ended the week after his death, and she moved on. Detective Morgan made a note. "I'll run a background check. In the meantime, I'd like to see what's on that USB drive. I'm meeting Dr. Anderson after my shift to review it." "Good. I'll join you." The detective rose to leave, then paused. "Until we know what we're dealing with, be careful who you trust. If Jimmy was right about medication theft, someone with significant access and authority is involved." The rest of Sarah's shift passed in a haze of routine duties and heightened vigilance. She checked on Emily frequently, relieved to see the girl's condition continuing to improve. Max remained a constant guardian, accepting gentle pats from nurses who had become his advocates, but never relaxing his watch over Emily. At 3:47 p.m., the now familiar howl echoed through the pediatric ward. This time, however, Max remained at Emily's bedside, his mournful cry directed at the ceiling rather than down the hall toward room 347. The sound brought tears to Sarah's eyes, a perfect expression of grief that somehow contained both love and loss in a single, soulful note. When her shift ended at 5, Sarah hurried to Dr. Anderson's veterinary clinic a few blocks from the hospital. Detective Morgan's police cruiser was already parked outside, and inside she found both men waiting in Anderson's cluttered office. "Let's see what Jimmy found," Dr. Anderson said gravely, booting up his computer. The USB drive contained dozens of spreadsheets and several video files. The spreadsheets detailed medication inventory discrepancies, small but consistent shortages of powerful opioids and other controlled substances. "He was tracking patterns," Detective Morgan observed. "These shortages all occurred during specific shifts and affected only certain patients, all veterans with limited family involvement." "The perfect targets," Sarah murmured. "Patients who might not question changes in their medication, or who might not have advocates watching closely." The video files were even more damning. Jimmy had somehow accessed security footage showing a nurse, presumably Elizabeth Chambers, systematically replacing medication bags, taking the originals, and substituting what appeared to be diluted solutions. "She's stealing the medications and replacing them with saline or severely diluted versions," Dr. Anderson explained, his medical knowledge evident. "These patients would have been receiving a fraction of their prescribed pain management, while the pure medications were being diverted elsewhere. For sale on the street," Detective Morgan added grimly. "Prescription opioids are worth a fortune to the right buyers." The final video showed Elizabeth Chambers entering Jimmy's room late at night. He appeared to be sleeping as she checked his IV bags. But as she turned to leave, the footage showed Jimmy's eyes open, watching her. "He caught her in the act," Sarah whispered. "The next day, his condition suddenly deteriorated. And 2 days later, he was dead," Detective Morgan finished, his expression hardening. "I think we're looking at a homicide investigation now." Dr. Anderson leaned back in his chair, his face ashen. Jimmy must have suspected she tampered with his medication that night. That's why he hid the evidence with Max. But why not report it immediately? Sarah wondered. Maybe he didn't have enough proof yet, Detective Morgan suggested. Or maybe he didn't know who he could trust. If this operation was sophisticated enough, it's unlikely Chambers was working alone. Sarah thought of Michael Davis's strangely intense interest in removing Max from the hospital. We need to figure out who else was involved. I'll get a warrant for the hospital's complete security footage and medication records, Detective Morgan said, rising from his chair. And I'll put out an APB for Elizabeth Chambers, though I suspect she's long gone with a different identity by now. What about Emily? Sarah asked, suddenly fearful. If someone realizes we're investigating, could she be in danger? I'll assign an officer to her room immediately, the detective assured her. And I suggest you be extremely careful, Nurse Thompson. If Miller was killed for what he discovered, anyone pursuing the same information could be at risk. Sarah returned to the hospital to find the veterans still maintaining their vigil outside. Their numbers now swelled to include family members and other community supporters. Local news cameras captured the scene as an elderly veteran in a wheelchair spoke passionately about service dogs and sacrifice. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Michael Davis had emerged from the board meeting looking thunderous, barking orders at his assistant and avoiding eye contact with staff. Sarah slipped past his office and headed straight to Emily's room, relieved to find a uniformed officer already stationed outside. Emily was sitting up in bed, her color much improved, reading a book to Max, who lay with his head on her lap, his eyes never leaving her face. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, checking the girl's latest vitals on the chart. "Much better." Emily smiled. "Dr. Phillips says I can definitely go home tomorrow." Her smile faltered. "But Grandma says Max still can't come with us. She says he reminds her too much of Daddy, and it makes her too sad." Sarah's heart ached for both the girl and the dog who had saved her. "We'll figure something out," she promised, though she had no idea what solution was possible. As she left Emily's room, Sarah nearly collided with Michael Davis in the hallway. "Thompson," he said curtly, "the board has made its decision, despite this public relations situation. We cannot make exceptions to hospital policy. The dog has until Friday to be removed." Friday, the same day, Emily was scheduled for discharge. Sarah bit back her anger, knowing now was not the time to confront him. "I understand," she said neutrally. "Was there anything else from the board meeting?" A flicker of something fear crossed Davis's face. "Just routine budget matters, nothing that concerns nursing staff." He checked his watch. "I have to finish some paperwork. It's been a long day." As he walked away, Sarah noticed his hands were trembling slightly. A man under pressure, certainly, but from what exactly later that night? After checking once more on Emily and Max, Sarah made her way to the hospital's records room. With her nursing credentials, she had access, though rarely needed to visit the dusty archive of paper files kept as backups to the digital system. She was searching for employment records from the period when Elizabeth Chambers had worked at Memorial. If the traveling nurse had been hired through normal channels, there would be reference checks, credentials verification, and perhaps a paper trail leading to whoever had facilitated her placement. The records room was dimly lit and rarely visited at night. Sarah moved between tall shelves of files, following the organizational system to the section containing employment documentation. She had just located the correct cabinet when she heard the door open behind her. Ducking instinctively behind a shelf, Sarah held her breath as footsteps approached. Through a gap in the files, she could see Michael Davis moving purposefully toward the same cabinet she had been about to open. He unlocked the cabinet with a key from his pocket, removed an entire folder, and replaced it with a different one from his briefcase. The substitution complete. He relocked the cabinet and quickly left the room. Sarah waited several minutes to ensure he was gone before approaching the cabinet. Using a paperclip to defeat the simple lock, she opened it to find a fresh-looking folder labeled Temporary Nursing Staff 2023. Inside were employment records for several traveling nurses, including Elizabeth Chambers. The documents looked perfect, too perfect. The paper was crisp, the ink too fresh for files that should have been handled multiple times over the past year. Sarah photographed everything with her phone before carefully replacing the folder exactly as Davis had left it. As she slipped out of the records room, a new suspicion formed in her mind. Davis wasn't just enforcing hospital policy with his crusade against Max. He was trying to remove the last living connection to Jimmy Miller, a connection that had already led to the discovery of disturbing evidence. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hospital to find Detective Morgan waiting for her in the lobby, his expression grave. "We've got a problem," he said quietly, guiding her to a private corner. "Elizabeth Chambers doesn't exist, at least not the one who worked here. The credentials were falsified. The references, phone numbers that now lead nowhere. Someone inside the hospital had to help create that identity and paperwork." "Davis," Sarah said immediately, explaining what she had witnessed in the records room. The detective nodded. "We suspected as much. The question is whether he was just taking kickbacks to look the other way, or if he was actively involved in diverting the medications. Either way, he's destroying evidence, and he's desperate to get rid of Max. We're executing a search warrant on Davis's home and office this morning. In the meantime, I have officers watching Emily's room, and the veterans outside have agreed to maintain their presence round the clock." He handed Sarah a card. "This has my direct line. Call immediately if anything seems off." Throughout her shift, Sarah felt as though she were moving through a fog of tension. Every interaction with other staff seemed loaded with potential danger. Who else might be involved in the medication scheme? Who could she truly trust? She checked on Emily frequently, relieved to find the girl continuing to improve and Max maintaining his protective watch. The officer outside the door nodded reassuringly each time she passed. At precisely 3:47 p.m., Max raised his head and released his daily howl. Emily, now understanding its significance, placed her small hand on his head as he mourned his fallen handler. Several nurses paused in the hallway, respectfully silent until the solemn ritual concluded. One floor below, in the hospital's administrative wing, Detective Morgan and 2 officers were systematically searching Michael Davis's office. The administrator had been escorted home, where another team was executing a parallel search warrant. Sarah was changing an IV bag for a patient when her phone vibrated with a text from Detective Morgan. "Found financial records. Davis received payments from pharmaceutical black market broker. Coming to update you." Relief flooded through her. They had proof. Jimmy's death would be investigated properly now. and whoever was responsible would face justice. She finished with her patient and hurried toward Emily's room to share the news. The hallway outside Emily's room was empty. The officer who had been stationed there was gone. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she pushed open the door. Emily's bed was empty, the sheets thrown back as if she had left in a hurry. Max was nowhere to be seen. On the rumpled bed lay a note in unfamiliar handwriting, "Roof, come alone or they both die." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she read the note again. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into eternity, while her mind raced through possibilities. She should call Detective Morgan. She should alert security. She should follow protocol. But Emily was on the roof with someone desperate enough to kidnap a child from a hospital room. Sarah's hand trembled as she dialed Morgan's number, quickly whispering, "Emily and Max taken. Note says, roof. Coming alone or they die. I'm going up." She ended the call before he could respond and slipped her phone back into her pocket. The stairwell to the roof was rarely used, a utilitarian concrete passage marked with safety signs and emergency procedures. Sarah's footsteps echoed as she climbed, her nurse's shoes barely making a sound on each step. 5 floors up, her legs burning, she reached the final door with its red emergency bar. She paused, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. Whatever waited on the other side, she needed to remain calm. Emily needed her to be calm. The door squeaked as Sarah pushed it open, a gust of cold afternoon air hitting her face. Memorial Hospital's roof was flat and gray, dotted with ventilation equipment and satellite dishes. The low wall around its perimeter offered little protection from the 4-story drop to the parking lot below. Michael Davis stood near the edge, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the setting sun. Beside him, Emily sat cross-legged on the rough surface, her hospital gown fluttering in the wind, her face streaked with tears. Max lay unnaturally still nearby, a muzzle strapped tightly around his snout, his legs bound with zip ties. "Close the door," Davis commanded, his voice eerily composed. Sarah complied, letting the heavy metal door swing shut behind her. "Michael, you don't want to do this. Detective Morgan already has the evidence. They found the financial records, A bitter smile twisted Davis's lips. "Of course they did. I knew it was over the moment that dog led you to the locker." He gestured toward Max with unconcealed hatred. "It should have been simple. Miller dies from complications. His records show nothing unusual. Case closed. But he had to play hero, hiding evidence on his damn dog." "Why?" Sarah asked, taking a small step forward, trying to position herself between Davis and Emily. "You're a hospital administrator. Why risk everything?" Davis laughed, a hollow sound that carried across the empty roof. "Do you have any idea what this place pays me? After 30 years in health care, I still have a mortgage, student loans, and a wife with expensive medical needs insurance won't cover." His hand moved to his pocket, emerging with a small pistol. Elizabeth offered a solution. 10% of everything she diverted. It was supposed to be temporary, just enough to get ahead. Sarah froze, her eyes fixed on the gun now pointed in her direction. "And Jimmy figured it out. He wasn't even supposed to be awake that night," Davis said, his voice rising with remembered frustration. "Elizabeth was always careful, but he saw her, and then he started asking questions, requesting his medication records." He shook his head. We couldn't risk exposure." "So you killed him," Sarah said, the words hanging in the cold air between them. "You gave the order. Elizabeth handled that part, a special cocktail that mimicked cardiac complications, untraceable." Davis's gaze drifted to Max, who had begun to stir, struggling against his restraints. But she didn't count on that animal being in the room somehow, watching everything, and she certainly didn't anticipate him coming back day after day, drawing attention. Emily whimpered, and Sarah took another careful step toward her. "Michael, let Emily go. She's just a child. She has nothing to do with this." "She's a loose end," Davis countered coldly. "Once she told you about the locker, about Elizabeth, she became a liability. And now, so are you." The door behind Sarah burst open, and Detective Morgan's voice rang out, "Police, drop your weapon! Davis!" In the split second that Davis turned toward the new threat, Sarah lunged forward, throwing herself toward Emily. She grabbed the girl and rolled, putting her own body between the child and danger. A gunshot cracked across the roof. Sarah felt no pain, just a rush of adrenaline as she covered Emily with her body, waiting for the next shot. Instead, she heard a guttural scream that wasn't human. Max, somehow free of his restraints, had launched himself at Davis. The muzzle still bound his jaw closed, preventing him from biting, but the force of his powerful body slammed into the administrator, sending both of them crashing to the ground. The gun skittered across the roof, spinning to a stop near a ventilation duct. Detective Morgan and the two officers swarmed forward, securing Davis, who lay stunned beneath the German shepherd's weight. Max stood over him, a low growl vibrating through his still muzzled snout, his eyes burning with a fury that seemed to contain all the grief and rage of the past 6 months. "Max, here." Emily's voice cut through the chaos, high and trembling. The dog's demeanor transformed instantly. He backed away from Davis and bounded toward Emily, who was still huddled in Sarah's protective embrace. Sarah reached up with shaking hands to remove the muzzle, and Max whined softly, licking Emily's tear-stained face. "You're safe now," Sarah whispered, holding both girl and dog close as officers handcuffed Davis. "You're both safe." Detective Morgan approached, holstering his weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his experienced eyes scanning them for injuries. Sarah shook her head, suddenly aware of how badly she was trembling. "We're okay." "How did you get here so fast?" "Your call," Morgan explained, helping her to her feet while Emily clung to Max. "And the officer assigned to Emily's room was found unconscious in a supply closet. He managed to trigger his emergency button before Davis subdued him." The detective glanced toward Davis, now being led away in handcuffs. "We were already on our way up when you reached the roof." Sarah's professional instincts finally broke through her shock. "Emily needs to be checked by a doctor immediately, and Max needs a vet. I don't know what Davis might have given him to keep him quiet." Within the hour, Emily had been examined and cleared by Dr. Phillips, who found no lasting harm beyond the emotional trauma of her ordeal. Max, examined by Dr. Anderson in the hospital parking lot, had been sedated with a veterinary tranquilizer but was already recovering, his protective instincts overcoming the drug's effects when Emily had been in danger. "He chewed through those zip ties, Doctor," Anderson marveled, showing Sarah the frayed plastic restraints. "Must have taken incredible determination in his sedated state. These military dogs are something else." As evening fell, the hospital buzzed with activity. Police officers took statements. Hospital security implemented new protocols. And administrative staff scrambled to contain the public relations nightmare of having their administrator arrested for murder and drug trafficking. The veterans who had maintained their vigil outside moved their protest to the police station, demanding justice for Jimmy Miller. Sarah sat beside Emily's bed, where the girl had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep. Max lay on the bed beside her, hospital regulations now thoroughly abandoned in the wake of the day's events. His eyes remained alert, tracking every person who entered the room despite his own obvious fatigue. "You did good," Sarah whispered to him, gently stroking his scarred face. "Jimmy would be so proud of you. You kept your promise to protect her." Max's tail thumped once against the mattress, his eyes meeting Sarah's with an intelligence that seemed to transcend species. In that moment, she understood completely why Jimmy had trusted this dog with evidence, with his daughter's safety, with his legacy. Detective Morgan appeared in the doorway, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with purpose. "Davis is talking," he said quietly, stepping into the room. "Trying to cut a deal. He's given us Elizabeth Chambers' real name and her last known location." "Will you find her?" Sarah asked. "Already have units on the way. She won't get far." Morgan's gaze settled on the sleeping child and her guardian dog. What happens to them now? It was the question Sarah had been asking herself for hours. Emily's grandmother had been contacted and was on her way to the hospital, but she had made it clear that her small apartment and fragile emotional state couldn't accommodate Max. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "They need each other, but they have nowhere to go together." Morgan was silent for a moment, then said, "My wife and I have a pretty big yard. We've been talking about getting a dog for years." He cleared his throat. "And we've got a spare bedroom that might suit a 9-year-old girl. At least temporarily, if her grandmother is amenable to some kind of shared custody arrangement." Sarah looked up at him in surprise. "You'd do that?" The detective's weathered face softened. "Jimmy's father was my partner for 15 years. I owe him that much." He glanced at Max. "Besides, that dog has earned a hero's retirement." The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Emily's grandmother arrived. Martha Wilson was a small woman with Emily's blue eyes and a face etched with grief. She stood in the doorway of her granddaughter's room, watching as Emily slept with one arm thrown protectively over Max. "He looks just like he did in Jimmy's photos from overseas," she said softly to Sarah, who had been waiting for her arrival. "My son loved that dog so much. Max saved Emily's life," Sarah explained gently. "Twice now. And he was trying to tell us the truth about Jimmy's death all along." Tears filled Martha's eyes. "Jimmy always said that dog understood things no human could explain." She wiped at her cheeks with a tissue. "I wasn't kind about Max after Jimmy died. The grief was too much. Seeing him without my son beside him broke my heart all over again." "He's been grieving too," Sarah said. "That's why he came to the hospital every day, to be close to Jimmy." Martha moved to the bedside, gently stroking Emily's hair. "The detective called me last night, explained everything, including his offer." She looked up at Sarah. "What do you think? Would it be good for Emily to stay with the Morgans sometimes, to keep Max in her life?" "I think it would be healing for both of them." Sarah answered honestly. "Max needs Emily as much as she needs him now. As if sensing they were discussing his fate, Max lifted his head, his intelligent eyes moving between the women. He made no sound, but his gaze was a question. Would he be separated from his last connection to Jimmy? Martha Wilson reached a trembling hand toward him, letting him sniff her fingers before gently touching his head. "You kept your promise to my son," she whispered. "You protected his little girl when no one else could." Max's tail thumped against the bed, and for the first time in 6 months, Sarah saw something new in the shepherd's eyes, a glimmer of peace, of hope. At precisely 3:47 p.m., Max lifted his head toward the ceiling. But instead of the mournful howl that had echoed through the hospital for months, he released a softer sound, still acknowledging his loss, but somehow different, less raw, less desperate. Emily, now awake, wrapped her arms around his neck. "He's still saying hello to Daddy," she explained to the adults watching with tear-filled eyes. "But he doesn't have to be so sad anymore. Daddy told me in my dream that he's okay now, and we should be too." Sarah looked at the girl and her dog, bathed in afternoon sunlight, and felt the truth of a bond that transcended death, that had revealed a murderer, that had ultimately saved lives. In his loyalty, Max had not only honored his handler's memory, he had ensured Jimmy's killer would face justice, and his daughter would have a future. As the afternoon light faded, Detective Morgan and his wife arrived to discuss arrangements with Martha. Emily sat between them, Max at her feet, as they worked out the details of a shared future that would keep both child and dog together. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart full. Tomorrow, Michael Davis would face arraignment. Elizabeth Chambers, whose real name was Carolyn Mercer, was already in custody in a neighboring state. Jimmy Miller's death would be officially reclassified as homicide. His name cleared of any suggestion that his wartime injuries had defeated him, and Max would never again need to stand vigil outside room 347 waiting for a handler who would never return. His mission was complete. His loyalty had revealed a truth no human had been able to uncover. Some bonds, Sarah realized, were simply unbreakable, not by distance, not by time, not even by death itself. The courtroom fell silent as Emily Miller took the stand, her small frame nearly disappearing behind the wooden witness box. At 9 years old, she was the youngest person to testify in what the local papers had dubbed the Memorial Hospital Murders. Max sat beside Detective Morgan in the gallery, a special dispensation granted by the judge after the defense had objected to having the dog on the stand with Emily. 3 months had passed since that terrifying afternoon on the hospital roof. Winter had settled over Oak Ridge, dusting the town with snow that reminded everyone of Christmas cards in simpler times. But inside the county courthouse, the atmosphere was anything but festive as Michael Davis and Caroline Mercer faced justice for their crimes. Sarah Thompson sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Emily recounted her father's last days in a voice that trembled but never broke. "Daddy told me something was wrong with his medicine," the girl explained, her blue eyes serious beneath her honey-blonde bangs. "He said it wasn't working right. And when he told the nurse, she just said he was confused." The prosecutor, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a backbone of steel, guided Emily gently through her testimony. "And what did your father give to Max before he died?" "He put something in Max's special collar pocket. He told me that if anything happened to him, Max would know what to do." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He said Max would protect me, no matter what." From his place beside Detective Morgan, Max whined softly. His ears perked forward at the sound of Emily's distress. The German shepherd's discipline held him in place, but his entire body quivered with the desire to go to her, to offer comfort, as he had done every day since their reunion. "No further questions," the prosecutor said, returning to her table. The defense attorney rose. His expensive suit and carefully arranged expression suggesting practiced compassion. "I have no questions for this witness, Your Honor. The defense recognizes the trauma Miss Miller has experienced and has no desire to compound it. It was a strategic move. No lawyer wanted to be seen cross-examining a 9-year-old orphan whose father had been murdered." The judge nodded and dismissed Emily, who walked with remarkable dignity back to her seat beside her grandmother. As she passed Max, she paused to press her forehead briefly against his, a gesture of such pure connection that several jurors visibly fought back tears. Later that day, Sarah took the stand. She recounted finding the key in Max's collar, discovering the hidden USB drive, and the confrontation on the hospital roof. Throughout her testimony, she found herself returning to the image of Max, appearing day after day outside room 347, maintaining his vigil when everyone else had moved on. "The dog was trying to tell us something all along," she explained, meeting the eyes of the jurors. "He knew what had happened to Sergeant Miller. He was the only witness to a murder none of us recognized." When the prosecution rested its case, the evidence against Davis and Mercer was overwhelming. Financial records showed payments to Davis from offshore accounts linked to black market pharmaceutical sales. Hospital security footage, preserved by Jimmy Miller before his death, clearly showed Mercer tampering with medications. Toxicology tests, rerun on preserved samples from Jimmy's autopsy, revealed traces of compounds that should never have been administered to a patient with his condition. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. As winter melted into spring, the story of Max's loyalty and Jimmy Miller's final act of heroism spread beyond Oak Ridge. A national news program featured the case, highlighting the incredible bond between a soldier and his dog, a bond that continued even after death, ultimately bringing a killer to justice. Dr. Robert Anderson expanded his veterinary practice to include a training program for service dogs. Inspired by Max's example, several local veterans volunteered as trainers, finding healing in working with animals who offered unconditional love and support. Memorial Hospital established the James Miller Memorial Wing, dedicated to the care of veterans and their service animals. The hospital board, chastened by the scandal, implemented new policies ensuring service dogs could remain with patients and even visit their handlers in hospital rooms. The most profound changes, however, were the quieter ones. Emily flourished in the shared custody arrangement between her grandmother and the Morgans. Weekdays were spent at her grandmother's apartment near her school, while weekends found her at the Morgans' farmhouse on the outskirts of town, where Max had acres to run and play. The nightmares that had plagued her after her father's death gradually subsided, replaced by dreams where Jimmy appeared healthy and smiling, often telling her he was proud. Max, no longer needing to maintain his daily vigil, transformed gradually from the solemn sentinel into a more typical dog, though one with exceptional training and intelligence. He still accompanied Emily everywhere possible, his protective instincts never diminishing. But now he also chased tennis balls, swam in the Morgan's pond, and even played with the neighboring farm's puppy. Sarah visited them often, finding unexpected healing in the simple joy of watching Emily and Max together. The bond between them was a living testament to Jimmy's love, a reminder that some connections transcended even death. On a warm Saturday in May, 6 months after the arrests, Sarah drove to the Morgans' farmhouse for a special gathering. The driveway was lined with cars bearing veteran license plates and military branch stickers. American flags fluttered from the porch railings, and a hand-painted banner announced Max's Medal of Honor Day. The backyard had been transformed for the occasion. Folding chairs faced a small podium, and veterans in uniforms spanning decades of service stood in groups, exchanging stories and handshakes. Emily darted between them in a pretty blue dress, proudly introducing Max to anyone who hadn't yet met him. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Detective Morgan, himself a veteran, spoke about courage and loyalty. Dr. Anderson shared stories of service animals throughout military history. Several of Jimmy's former unit members recalled how Max had saved them during the ambush in Afghanistan, taking shrapnel to his face while alerting them to hidden explosives. Then a high-ranking military official stepped forward, kneeling before Max, who sat at perfect attention, seeming to understand the solemnity of the moment. In recognition of extraordinary heroism, both in combat and on the home front, we present this commendation to Max, service number K437, formerly of the 54th Battalion, and partner to Sergeant James Miller. He attached a special medal to Max's collar, right beside his military tags. Max remained perfectly still, his scarred face solemn, until Emily knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his neck. Only then did his discipline break, his tail wagging as he turned to lick her cheek. As the crowd dispersed toward tables laden with potluck dishes, Sarah found herself standing beside Martha Wilson, Emily's grandmother. The older woman's eyes were damp as she watched Emily and Max accepting congratulations from the veterans. "Jimmy would be so proud," Martha said softly. "Not just of Max, but of all of us for finally listening to what he was trying to tell us." Sarah nodded, her own throat tight with emotion. Max never gave up, not on Jimmy's memory, and not on making sure the truth came out. "That's the thing about love like that," Martha replied, her weathered hand taking Sarah's and squeezing gently. "It doesn't end. It just finds new ways to show itself." As if on cue, the afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the gathering in golden light. And in that moment, as Max stood beside Emily, with his new medal gleaming against his fur, Sarah could almost believe Jimmy Miller was there too, his mission complete, his legacy secure, his faithful companion still watching over what he loved most. Sarah Thompson stood in the empty hallway outside room 347, the rhythmic beeping of monitors from nearby rooms creating a familiar backdrop to her thoughts. 1 year had passed since Michael Davis and Carolyn Mercer had been convicted. 1 year since justice had finally come for Jimmy Miller. The room had been occupied by dozens of patients since then. Yet Sarah still paused whenever she passed it, remembering the German shepherd who had maintained his lonely vigil for so many months. Memorial Hospital had changed in subtle but significant ways. New security protocols ensured medication dispensing was monitored more carefully. Administrative oversight had been restructured with additional checks and balances. The James Miller Memorial Wing for Veterans Care had opened last month, featuring special accommodations for service animals and a wall of honor displaying Jimmy's photograph alongside other local veterans. But the most profound changes had occurred in the lives touched directly by Max's unwavering loyalty. Sarah ran her hand along the smooth wall outside room 347, then glanced at her watch. It was time. She had promised Emily she wouldn't be late. The drive to Oak Ridge Elementary took only 15 minutes. The school year was ending. And today was a special presentation that Emily had been preparing for weeks. As Sarah pulled into the visitor parking lot, she spotted Max immediately, his distinctive profile unmistakable as he sat perfectly at attention beside Detective Morgan's wife, Elaine, near the school entrance. "There's our nurse," Elaine called warmly as Sarah approached. "Emily's been asking if you'd made it yet." Max's tail thumped against the pavement in greeting, his intelligent eyes following Sarah's movements with the focused attention that had never diminished, even as he settled into his new life. The scar above his eye had faded slightly, giving him a distinguished rather than fearsome appearance. "Wouldn't miss it for anything," Sarah replied, kneeling to greet Max properly with a gentle scratch behind his ears. "How's our hero doing today?" "Proud as can be," Elaine laughed. "Frank dressed him in his special collar with all his medals." Emily insisted. Indeed. Max's collar displayed not only his military commendation, but also the Civilian Hero Medal presented by the mayor, and a special tag identifying him as a certified therapy dog. After the trial, Dr. Anderson had worked with Max and Emily to channel the shepherd's protective instincts and exceptional intelligence into therapy work. Now, twice a week, they visited Memorial Hospital together, bringing comfort to veterans and long-term patients. Inside the school auditorium, parents and guests settled into rows of folding chairs. A large banner announcing "Heroes Among Us 5th Grade Special Projects" hung across the stage where students were arranging display boards and rehearsing presentations. Sarah spotted Emily immediately, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her blue eyes serious as she organized her materials. Martha Wilson waved from a seat in the front row, having saved spots for Sarah and the Morgans. In the year since the trial, Martha had gradually opened her heart not only to Max, but to the extended family that had formed around Emily. Sunday dinners at the Wilson apartment now regularly included Sarah, the Morgans, and several of Jimmy's former military colleagues who had remained in touch. "She's been practicing her speech for weeks," Martha whispered as Sarah took her seat. "Even Max has had to listen to it at least 20 times. The presentations began with the principal explaining that each 5th grader had researched and prepared a special project about heroes in their community or family. One by one, children presented posters about firefighters, police officers, doctors, and military personnel. When Emily's turn came, she walked confidently to the center of the stage. Max, who had been waiting patiently in the wings with Elaine, padded silently to her side, sitting at perfect attention as Emily began to speak. "My hero isn't just one person," she began, her clear voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. "My hero is a partnership my dad, Sergeant James Miller, and his military dog, Max." On the screen behind her appeared a photograph of Jimmy in uniform, kneeling beside a younger Max in a military working dog vest. Both looked directly at the camera, embodying the same steadfast determination. When I was little, my dad told me that heroes aren't people who are never afraid. Heroes are people who do what's right, even when they're terrified. Emily's hand dropped to rest lightly on Max's head. And sometimes, heroes keep fighting for what's right, even after they're gone. With remarkable poise for a 10-year-old, Emily recounted how her father and Max had served together in Afghanistan, how Max had saved Jimmy's unit from an ambush, how Jimmy had later adopted Max when the dog was deemed too traumatized for continued service. She explained how they had helped each other heal from their wartime experiences. Then her voice grew softer as she shared the events of the previous year, her father's mysterious death, Max's daily vigil at the hospital, and how his loyalty had eventually revealed the truth about a criminal operation that had cost her father his life. Max never stopped believing in his mission to protect, Emily said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Even when everyone told him to leave the hospital, even when no one understood why he kept coming back to my dad's room, he never gave up. The auditorium was completely silent. Parents and teachers alike transfixed by the story of extraordinary devotion. Scientists say dogs live in the present, that they don't understand death the way humans do. Emily continued, "But I think Max understood something even more important than death. He understood loyalty." She knelt beside the shepherd, who turned to gaze directly into her eyes. "And he taught all of us that love doesn't end just because someone is gone." As Emily concluded her presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Many wiped tears away unashamedly. Max, ever dignified, remained seated at attention, though his tail swept slowly across the stage floor in acknowledgment of the appreciation directed his way. After the presentations, as guests mingled in the school cafeteria enjoying refreshments, Sarah found herself standing beside Detective Morgan, watching Emily proudly introduce Max to her classmates. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Morgan remarked, his weathered face thoughtful. "Sometimes I still expect to get a call from hospital security about that shepherd showing up at 8 a.m. sharp." Sarah nodded. "I still look for him every time I pass room 347. Some habits are hard to break." "Speaking of which," Morgan said, lowering his voice slightly, "it's almost 347. Have you noticed if he's still—" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Not as mournfully as before, but every day at exactly 3:47 he still pauses whatever he's doing and looks up for just a moment. Emily says he's saying hello to her dad." Morgan checked his watch. "Should be just about now." As if on cue, across the cafeteria, Max suddenly lifted his head, his ears perking forward. He didn't howl as he once had in the hospital corridors, but his posture straightened, and his gaze lifted upward for several seconds in silent acknowledgment of an absence still felt, a connection still honored. Emily, in the middle of showing her teacher her project board, paused to place her hand on Max's back, a gesture of shared remembrance that needed no words. Then, as quickly as the moment had come, it passed. Max returned his attention to the present, accepting a gentle pat from Emily's teacher while staying protectively close to his young charge. Later that evening, a small celebration gathered at the Morgans' farmhouse. Dr. Anderson brought his new therapy dog trainees, 2 retired military dogs and a young Labrador showing exceptional promise. Martha Wilson arrived with her famous apple pie. Several of Jimmy's former unit members came with their families, the children immediately racing to the backyard where the Morgans had installed a swing set for Emily's weekend visits. Sarah found herself sitting on the porch steps beside Emily, watching as Max romped with the other dogs in a rare display of uninhibited joy. In the golden light of sunset, with his sleek coat gleaming and his powerful body moving with effortless grace, he looked younger, more like the dog in Emily's photographs from before the war, before the injuries, before the loss. "He's happy here," Emily said, following Sarah's gaze. "Daddy would be glad. Your dad would be incredibly proud of both of you," Sarah replied, putting an arm around the girl's shoulders. "Your presentation today was amazing." Emily leaned against her, a gesture of trust that still warmed Sarah's heart. "I'm writing a book about Max and Daddy," she confided. "Well, not really a book yet, more like stories. But someday I want everyone to know about them." "That's a wonderful idea," Sarah encouraged. "Their story deserves to be shared." "Sarah," Emily's voice grew hesitant, "do you think dogs really understand about heaven? About people being gone but still watching over us?" Sarah considered the question carefully, knowing that at 10 years old, Emily deserved an honest answer. "I think dogs understand love in ways humans are still figuring out. And I think Max knows your dad is still part of who you are, who he is." Emily nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "That's what I think too. Max taught me that just because you can't see someone anymore doesn't mean they stop being important." From across the yard, Max looked up suddenly, as if hearing his name. Seeing Emily on the porch steps, he abandoned his play and trotted over, settling beside her with a contented sigh. Emily's small hand automatically found the spot behind his ear that he loved best. As darkness fell and fireflies began to twinkle across the Morgans' property, Sarah observed the gathering this makeshift family formed through tragedy but sustained by something stronger. Detective Morgan flipped burgers on the grill while trading stories with Jimmy's former commander. Martha Wilson taught one of the younger children how to weave clover chains. Dr. Anderson discussed his therapy dog program with anyone who would listen. And at the center of it all, perfectly content in the moment, yet somehow still standing guard, Max remained beside Emily, the living embodiment of a promise kept, a love that had transcended death, a loyalty that had revealed truth when all else failed. In the soft Virginia evening, with crickets providing nature's soundtrack and stars beginning to appear overhead, Sarah realized that room 347 was no longer the sacred space it had once been. The true memorial to Jimmy Miller was right here in his daughter's smile, in the community that had formed around her, and in the extraordinary dog who had refused to abandon his post until justice was done. Some stories end with justice, Sarah thought, but the best ones continue with healing. 5 years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Emily Miller grew from a solemn child into a confident teenager, her father's determined spirit evident in the set of her jaw and the clarity of her blue eyes. Max, now showing distinguished gray around his muzzle, moved with the dignified deliberation of an elderly shepherd, his pace slower, but his devotion unchanged. The bond between them remained extraordinary, a living testament to promises kept and a love that transcended ordinary understanding. Though Max had officially become the Morgan's dog. Everyone in Oak Ridge knew he belonged heart and soul to Emily, just as she belonged to him. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah Thompson pulled into the Morgans' driveway, leaves crunching beneath her tires. 5 years had brought changes to her life as well. A promotion to director of nursing at Memorial Hospital, a small cottage purchased on the outskirts of town, and a deepening connection to the unusual family that had formed around Emily and Max. Today's gathering was bittersweet. Dr. Anderson had called last week with news they had all been dreading but expecting. Max, now 12 years old with a body bearing the scars of war and age, was showing signs of significant decline. His hips were failing despite medication, and his once sharp senses were dulling. The time had come to discuss difficult decisions. Emily met Sarah at the door, her teenage frame still slight, but her presence somehow stronger than her physical size suggested. At 15, she wore her honey blonde hair in a practical braid, and her father's military dog tags hung alongside her own necklace. "He's having a good day," she said without preamble, leading Sarah to the sunroom where Max lay on a specially padded bed near the window. "He ate all his breakfast and even walked to the mailbox with me." Max's tail thumped weakly against his bed when he saw Sarah, his eyes cloudy now with cataracts still tracking her movements with remarkable awareness. She knelt beside him, her nurse's hands gently assessing as she stroked his graying coat. "Hey, handsome," she murmured, finding the spot behind his ear that had always been his favorite. "Still charming all the ladies. I see." Detective Morgan, now Chief Morgan, since his promotion 3 years ago, and his wife Elaine joined them, along with Dr. Anderson and Martha Wilson. The conversation that followed was gentle but direct, everyone mindful of Emily's feelings while acknowledging the reality of Max's condition. "He's in pain most days now," Dr. Anderson explained kindly. "The medications help, but they can't stop the progression. His military injuries combined with age." He let the sentence trail off, unnecessary to complete. Emily nodded, her face composed though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I know," she said simply. "He's been telling me." No one questioned this statement. Over the years, they had all witnessed the almost supernatural communication between girl and dog, the way Max would suddenly appear at Emily's side moments before she experienced a nightmare about her father. The way Emily somehow knew when Max's pain was spiking, even when he showed no outward signs. "What do you think we should do?" Chief Morgan asked, his weathered face gentle with understanding. Emily looked at Max, who returned her gaze with unwavering focus. I think he's ready to see Dad again," she whispered. "But not quite yet. There's something he needs to show me first." Later that afternoon, after the others had gone inside to give Emily time alone with Max, Sarah watched from the kitchen window as the girl helped the aging shepherd into the back of the Morgans' SUV. Emily had asked if she could take Max for one last special outing, just the two of them. Chief Morgan had agreed reluctantly, making Emily promise to keep her phone on and to call immediately if Max seemed distressed. "She said Max wants to show her something," Elaine explained, joining Sarah at the window. "Something important before he goes." Sarah nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. They've always had their own language. The autumn day faded toward evening, and worry began to creep in as hours passed without word from Emily. Chief Morgan was just reaching for his keys, preparing to search for them, when headlights swept across the farmhouse windows. The SUV pulled slowly into the driveway, and Emily emerged, her face streaked with tears but wearing an expression of profound peace. She opened the back door and gently helped Max down. The old dog moved with surprising purpose, something clutched carefully in his mouth. "He took me to Dad's favorite place," Emily explained as they all gathered on the porch. "The fishing spot on Miller's Creek where they used to go every weekend. I haven't been there since before." Max approached Emily slowly, then placed what he had been carrying at her feet, a weathered metal box, dirt-encrusted but intact. "He started digging as soon as we got there," Emily continued, her voice filled with wonder. "Like he knew exactly where to look. It took him forever, and I had to help. But he wouldn't stop until we found it." With trembling fingers, Emily opened the box. Inside lay a sealed envelope with her name written in a strong masculine hand, a small velvet pouch, and a flash drive. "Dad buried this," she whispered, "before he died. When he suspected something was wrong at the hospital, Max knew where it was all along." Chief Morgan helped Emily open the sealed letter, which contained a heartfelt message from Jimmy to his daughter, words of love, advice for her future, and confirmation that he had suspected foul play at the hospital. The velvet pouch held his Purple Heart and a small diamond ring that had belonged to Emily's mother. "He wanted me to have these when I was old enough to understand," Emily said, clutching the treasures to her chest. "And Max waited until he thought I was ready." That night, Max slept peacefully beside Emily's bed, his mission finally complete. In the morning, when Dr. Anderson arrived to examine him, the old shepherd greeted him with calm dignity, as if some great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. 1 week later, on a golden afternoon, when the Virginia hills blazed with autumn color, they gathered again at Miller's Creek. Emily held Max in her arms, his once powerful body now frail, but his eyes clear and focused on her face, as Dr. Anderson administered the injection that would end his pain and release him from his aging body. "Thank you for everything," Emily whispered against his graying fur. "Tell Dad I love him." Max's tail thumped once against her arm, his eyes never leaving hers until they slowly closed for the final time. They buried him there, beside the creek where Jimmy Miller had spent his happiest moments, beneath an oak tree that would stand guard over him just as faithfully as he had stood guard over room 347. On the simple marker, beneath Max's name and military service number, Emily had insisted on adding words that summed up a lifetime of extraordinary loyalty. "Faithful beyond death. Mission accomplished." And precisely at 3:47 that afternoon, as they stood in silent tribute around the fresh grave, a single shaft of sunlight broke through the autumn clouds, illuminating the marker for one perfect, golden moment, a final acknowledgment of a promise kept, and a devotion that had, in the end, transcended even death itself. In a world where loyalty seems increasingly rare, Max's story reminds us of values our generation holds dear. This German shepherd, scarred from war, grieving his handler, showed up faithfully at that hospital every single day, maintaining his post when everyone else had moved on. How many of us have felt forgotten in our twilight years, wondering if our contributions still matter? Like Max, many of us have watched the world change around us, yet we hold fast to what we know is right. We understand what it means to keep promises, to honor those we've lost, and to protect the vulnerable without expectation of reward. In this faithful dog, we see reflections of our own steadfastness, the same dedication we've shown to family, country, and principles throughout our lives. Max's story affirms that such devotion is never wasted, even when unrecognized. It reminds us that the bonds we forge in this life with our spouses of 50 years, with children now grown, with friends who've stood beside us through decades, transcend time, distance, even death itself. Like Max, we know that true love doesn't end when someone is gone. It finds new ways to show itself, continuing to shape the world long after we're no longer in it.